And if you get like 100 farmers charging across a field with their farming tools, maybe some axes and a sword here and there, against heavily armored English guys, of course you're going to lose. Which is why I don't know how they even won the Battle of Stirling Bridge
No,
in
no,
the film.
no. They don't question it. I've learned a long time ago. The more I question Hollywood, the more my brain hurts. So, like, I still question it, but at a certain point, I just stop.
Yeah.
What's poppin', y'all? Welcome to Post Finale. I'm Ankit Madhira. I'm an actor and a musician who hasn't seen a lot of films, so to make my friends happy and potentially provide a new perspective on some popular films, I am on a quest to change that. I'm not on this quest alone, however. This week I am joined by actor, singer, producer, TikTok star, and my friend Scottish Brian. Brian, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. It's good to see your face. It's been a couple months since I've seen you.
It's been a hot minute.
It's been a hot minute, but I'm doing well. I'm very excited to finally have you on this podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Let's go.
Yeah. It's been a while in the making. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are jumping back in to talk about Braveheart. Now, Brian, before we continue this journey and we learn about Falkirk and what happens over at that battle, you were the one that recommended this film to me. So, I have a question. When did you first see it? And what made you want to recommend this film specifically to me?
Well, Braveheart is always. I don't remember when I first saw it. I was a child. But it's one of those films that's always existed in the psyche of a lot of people, especially Scottish people. Uh, and it's one of those iconic cornerstone films that everyone has seen. And again, like if someone hasn't seen it, the first question you get asked is, "Why haven't you seen this?" I would say it's one of the most iconic movies of the 90s.
Cool. Yeah. And so it's just something that like you've pretty much grown up with growing up in
Absolutely.
Scotland. Okay.
Yeah, everyone remembers, even if you haven't seen the film, everyone remembers, those like kind of iconic lines: "Freedom, uh, uh, freedom, and freedom." Admittedly,
Uh,
that is the only iconic line I remember from it. But
you're doing great. You're doing fantastic, wonderful. So just to catch you up and listeners, just a fresh reminder, what I think is going to happen here in the Battle of Falkirk coming up is that Robert the Bruce is not going to show, and it's going to be the defeat of William Wallace. I don't know if he gets captured at this battle or if he gets captured later on, but I think that he probably gets captured at the end of this battle. And then going forward, we see that the princess tries to like help him in some way, shape, or form, and she fails in doing so. He gets executed at the end. That much I do know happens solely because I know a little bit of history. But yeah. So where we are is they are throwing tar around the battlefield and getting ready. It is tar, right? It's not
it's
anything different.
it's a flammable liquid,
Okay. It's a
so
flammable liquid.
it probably is tar. Probably is tar.
Sure. So Hamish tells William that Robert the Bruce is not coming. William says that he will come, and I'm just like, I don't think so. He's not showing up. Meanwhile, Mornay and Lachlan, two of the other Scottish lords that we saw at the Battle of Stirling Bridge, which didn't have a bridge, logical sense, but they were both there. They've both arrived, so William's still pretty sure that he's going to show up. And the battlefield is set, and the king is there, and it's a lovely gathering. There are many lovely troops. It's great. And the king originally says no to the archers, and his scouts say that the Scots archers are miles away. They're no threat to the English, and arrows cost money. Use the Irish. The dead cost us nothing. And this is where I was like, come on, Stephen, this is your moment to shine. Because as far as I know, the Irish don't like the English. So I'm still kind of baffled on why the Irish are on the English's side right now.
Do you want my input on that one?
I mean, I want your input the entire time.
Okay, so um, The Irish were subjugated by the English around about that time. So the Irish soldiers that are there are peasants. They're literally just peasants. They're cannon fodder. Um, the Irish were conscripted into English armies at the time against their own will, and and like the Irish are offered, you know, meager amounts of money. I mean, it doesn't cost that much to the English king, but they are there for their own benefit, if that makes sense.
Okay, that does make a bit more sense. Yeah, yeah. So as they are doing this, I was like, okay, hopefully Steven can pull through. And he's also sending in the infantry and the cavalry. So the English troops start to advance, and I'm like, oh no, look, Robert the Bruce hasn't shown up. Oops, who could have predicted that? Most people. So the Scots start advancing as well, and there's a group of men before the armed English army, and I at first was like, all right, are these the Irish soldiers? Turns out that they are. And if so, I was like, all right, why is it such a tiny fraction of it? But it makes sense based on what you've told me. And I was like, all right, I'm pretty sure the Scots lose this battle, but I thought it would be more of a fight if the Irish switch sides. But we see what happens.
So, right, what would you like? A historical um, uh, retelling of it, or why did they just lose that particular battle?
Oh, I mean, like, we find out why they lose the particular battle, but what's the history behind it? Because you probably know more of that than I do.
Right, so the Battle of Falkirk was a complete rout for the Scottish. William Wallace employed what we refer to as a skiltron. Do you know what a skiltron is?
No.
William Wallace's skiltrons were essentially spear circles, circles of spears, and basically the idea was that uh, horses couldn't get anywhere near them. If they came anywhere near them, well, they just get stabbed, just get pointed off their horses. Um, but these skiltrons were too powerful. So what the English did, was they used their longbowmen, which the film does allude to. It was the longbowmen that won the battle for them at Falkirk. Um, but what the film shows is, well, actually, all three battles that happen in the film are all on open fields. And if the Scottish actually did fight like that, they would have lost completely, because it doesn't show much strategy in the films. It just shows a bunch of like poorly armored men charging across the field against a bunch of like many more armored men. That by all accounts, the Scottish should have lost every single battle in the film. By all accounts. Again, I'm sure, as you saw in the first film, Ross probably told you. Sorry, in the first part of the film, Ross told you that there was a bridge at Stirling,
Yeah.
and that's how they won. They lost Falkirk because of the bows. I won't tell you how they won the final battle because you haven't gotten to that part of the film yet.
Is that
But
the
yeah,
battle at the end?
there's a battle at the end, but
That'll be the end of the next episode.
that'll be the end of the next episode. So I'm not going to talk about that one just yet. But yeah, Falkirk was a complete disaster for the Scots, for two different, well, for the real life reason and for the reason in the film. But same conclusion in both real life and the film. Archers.
Oh, fair enough. Yeah, so pretty much what happens is the two groups start running together, and look, the Irish do switch sides. Lovely. Wonderful. I do enjoy the king as he's just sitting there on his horse and it's just like, Irish. Like, he's just like disappointed of like, I should have seen this coming. And so William signals the archers who shoot the flaming arrows at the rest of the troops and the cavalry, setting a fire and breaking their ranks and kind of just causing chaos. Apparently, the king's, scouts were very misinformed on where those archers were.
Yeah. I don't know any about any real life equivalents of that. I think it's just dramatic effect. But I mean, like, either his scouts are really but how do you get that wrong?
I don't know how you get it that wrong to where they're not even like in the vicinity. So as the flames die down, the two groups advance, the battle begins, and I was like, once again, an impressive amount of extras and probably a lot of rubber swords.
Hmm. Uh, I mean, hopefully no horses were harmed in the making that film. Actually,
I
I was
really hope not. Otherwise, it would ruin this film for me.
when I was rewatching the film last night. The thing that struck out most to me was just William Wallace is very wasteful with his horses. Like I'm talking Grand Theft Auto levels of wasteful, which is actually what I'm playing at the moment. It's very. He doesn't take care of them. He just sort of just rides with them, and is just like, yeah, well, they're dead now,
Yeah,
and just sort of just abandons them.
yeah. He doesn't bond with his horses.
No,
No, there's
massive
no
L to that
bonding.
guy. Massive L to
So
that guy.
then you have a massive war. Here's the description of it, ladies and gentlemen. There's a lot of stabbing, swinging of axes and swords, maiming, killing, and sword fighting. There you go. That's the gist of what happens for a solid like 3.5 minutes of the film. So William at some point grabs an English flag and starts waving it as a signal to the other Scots. And it's for the other lords, but instead of joining, they leave William on his own to meet his demise. And I was like, oh, I mean, like, I knew that he lost, but I didn't realize it was going to be losing because they took backroom deals with the king.
Yeah, yeah. A massive problem during the Scottish Wars of Independence. Cowardly lords getting bought off. I mean that telling of it is a very dumbed down version of it. I mean they wouldn't have even turned up to the battle. Like it doesn't make sense that they even turned up there in the first place. To be honest.
Yeah, that was kind of my issue with it, and I say it right after the king reveals that he pretty much paid off Mornay for double his lands in Scotland and matching the states in England, and then Lachlan turned for much less. But I was like, at that point, why are they even showing up? Just to flee? Like, just don't show up and give them hope.
Hollywood,
Like,
literally
yeah,
Hollywood.
that's what I figured. But like, why would you even show up and potentially, like, say that the king was going to send some archers, then you're putting your men at risk by showing up.
I guess.
If
Yeah.
they're following some arrows, like you might lose a couple of them. So like it doesn't make any sense. But like I said, Hollywood. So the king orders for the archers, and one of the knights is like, "Aren't we going to hit our own troops?" And he's like, "Well, yes, but we'll hit theirs as well, and we have reserves." And I was like, the king truly doesn't care for anybody.
I love the sort of sliminess of what was that actor called again? Do you know?
I don't know who the actor is,
The
but
English King. It's like
he does beautifully.
oh yeah, it's a beautiful voice that you just love to hate. What is it? Yes, but we'll hit theirs as well. We have reserves.
Something like that.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
It is pretty good. So the soldiers on both sides they start to fall, and Hamish's father gets an axe to the gut. And I was like, "Oh man, I didn't
Massive L
want
to that
him
guy.
to die." I know, like I liked that character. He already got his arm chopped off or his hand. He doesn't need to lose his life now. Um, but then the king sends in reinforcements, and he's just like, "I want Wallace alive if possible. Dead, just as good." Just fantastic. Just it really is just like, yeah, don't care.
I mean, same effect, right?
So look, he wants him alive so that he can torture him. If he's
Mhm.
dead, it's just like, okay, well, like that's just one little pest that I don't have to worry about anymore.
Mhm.
Fantastic. So and then he's just like, send news of victory. Shall we retire? And I was like, wow, you did not even lift a finger. Like,
The it is. You know how we see Wallace on the battlefield doing lots of you know heroic like fighting bad guys and that.
yeah.
Longshanks being at the back of the army, just watching it all happen. That's more realistic. than what Wallace was doing.
Right.
If Wallace was actually at the front of at the front line, like actually doing some fighting, I mean, it's very likely he did some fighting, but like there's absolutely no chance in hell he would actually be at the front. Edward being at the back, watching it all, is way more realistic. Way more realistic.
Exactly. Like, it doesn't make sense that Wallace is on the front lines if he's the mastermind behind it all.
Exactly. Like I don't need to say why it's why that was done, but I mean, it makes for a better film, doesn't it? And it shows Edward just being a smarmy standard manager, um, just not doing anything. But yeah, I love the actor that plays Longshanks in that scene. It just shows how like, he's just very uncaring. It's like the way he looks at his second in command when he's talking about hitting his own troops. He gives him that sort of look that's like, are you for real? It's like, do we really care about our own troops? Like, is this really your concern?
It's almost like, he's in a game of chess, he's literally just using them as pawns. And, like, sometimes pawns are useful, but they've outlived their usefulness.
No, you're absolutely right. The As well as that, I mean, he captures that so well, and actually, out in the entire film, that is the best accent. Like he has the best accent in the entire film. Because all the others, I don't know if you've touched on this or Ross touched on this, but all the Scottish accents in it, bar one, and bar the child at the start, are terrible. Like really bad
Ross didn't touch
accents.
that at all. For
The
context, ladies and gentlemen, Ross is also Brian's friend. So that's how I met Ross.
Yeah, the Scottish accents that you hear in this film are legitimately terrible. Um, the only good accents in it, I think, Hamish. I want to say Hamish was the other good one, and the child, the
At the beginning.
at the beginning. Those two actors, I think, are legitimately Scottish or have had really good dialect coaches. But I reckon they did not hire a single dialect coach for the entire film.
But like I thought, according to Ross, like a lot of the actors in the film, other than like Mel Gibson, but like it gave way for a lot of Scottish actors in the film.
It's interesting because as a Scottish person myself, I listen to that and it sounds like Americans doing a Scottish accent. So unless the actors that are Scottish in there have been told otherwise by Mel Gibson to sound a bit more stereotypical, that wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, because Ross said that like it gave people an in. I don't know how Steven's accent was in terms of Irish, but at least like when he showed up, I didn't think he was Irish.
Stephen's accent is fine actually. The other thing you need to remember as well is that just because you're from a country doesn't necessarily mean you have the stereotypical accent. So Stephen, as an Irishman, I can completely believe that. 100% I can believe that. Did you touch on your last episode about the fact that it's an American movie, not a Scottish movie?
We have touched on the fact that like it was made by Americans.
I was speaking to Ilona about this last night. I'm going to ask you a question. Do you think this movie would have done better if it was made by Scottish people?
I think it would have been more historically accurate.
I don't think it wouldn't have been nearly as popular. That's what I was saying. And I think because a lot of Scots are in two minds about this film. Um, yes, it was horribly inaccurate, but it brought this tale, true story ish, brought this tale to the forefront. Everyone now knows about William Wallace, and people are more aware of the cause of Scottish independence because of this film. Because what this film did for a lot of Scottish people is it brought the idea of national identity back to a people that had sort of forgotten about about the fact that they were once an independent country and not just a region of Britain.
Right.
Yeah, the fact that it was made by Americans, yeah, not great. But if it wasn't made by Mel Gibson, if it wasn't made by Hollywood, then we just wouldn't be aware of the story. A lot of people wouldn't be aware about it. So I think this movie is great. as it is. Not authentic, but still great.
Yeah, it can still be a good film. It's loosely based on history. It's just not as accurate as other films might be. But yeah, so what's going on now is, they've gone and Wallace gets hit in the heart with an arrow. He keeps fighting. He sees the king leaving and he starts to, chase after the king. He grabs a horse, chases after, and Stephen sees him and he starts to give chase as well. Now, a knight with the joust turns and then is told to charge at Will. And instead of hitting Will, he hits the horse and it sends William flying off. And I was like, damn it, not the horse again. Stop killing off the
Exactly what I'm
horses.
talking about. Exactly what I'm talking about.
Like, I don't know if Mel Gibson had like a problem or like a traumatic experience with horses, but like, why is there so much horse maiming in this film?
Um, I mean, realistically, horses were so common back then. They were more probably just as common as sheep and cows, and yes, they were medieval cars, but they were bred en masse for this exact reason. Horses had so many uses. Scotland, well, Northern Europe didn't have oxen, and oxen were, in most other parts of the world, heavy machinery. So we had to. So us in Northern Europe, we required horses. So they were very very easy to come by, and on the flip side of that, when you lost them, it wasn't really too much of a big deal.
Yeah, fair enough. So anyway, Williams passed out, and I was just like, okay, so Steven's gonna show up. He's gonna save William before he can be dragged away. And I was immediately wrong because William was just faking being passed out. And then as the knight goes down to like kind of grab him, he manages to pull off the helmet of the knight, and it's Robert the Bruce. And I was like, oh, I didn't see that one coming. Um, did not, and that's when I was just like, well, I mean, I guess he wasn't like wrong when William said that he would come. He just didn't expect him to be on the other side.
Yep. Very very unlikely that happened. Almost. I mean, like, yeah, so dramatized that.
Yeah,
The thing that strikes me about this film is just how small this world is, supposedly. William Wallace just happening to chat to the Princess of Wales, who would just happen to turn up, like, would never have happened. Why would you send such a valuable person? And likewise, why would you send one of the Scottish heirs to the throne in a battle like that, like with the king? Which just never would have happened.
it doesn't make any sense of why he is there. It's Hollywood, it's dramatized, but also Ross did mention that he is pretty sure that William Wallace and Robert the Bruce never crossed paths. At
Almost
least
certainly.
there's Yeah, at least there maybe like if they did randomly once, but like there's no record or documentation of the two specifically crossing paths and having like discussions.
Yeah, almost certainly. They definitely would have been aware of each other. Um,
Right.
but I mean, Scotland was a very big country for back then. Uh, I mean, like you're talking about literal days to get across the country, and written letter was the what am I trying to say? Was the way to talk back then. Um, there's just no chance they would have ever communicated physically with one another, and they would have just used letters to talk.
Yeah. So, and like I said, they might have met, but like there's no recorded documentation of them ever having met. So, William hesitates. He kind of pulls back and doesn't go in for the kill. And, he is obviously very hurt by this and he falls to the ground. And it's, nobody says anything for a very long time. The music is absolutely beautiful at this point of the film. That is one thing throughout the film. The soundtrack is incredible. It is a fantastic soundtrack. And so some of the English troops that are on foot start arriving, and William just lays there in his own defeat. Robert sees them, runs over to Wallace, telling him to get up, tries to get him to move, but Wallace is completely broken. Stephen shows up on a horse and is confused by Robert being there as well. But Robert's just like, get him out of here, and they hoist Will up onto a horse. And Stephen, is upset that Robert is on the English side right now, but is like, all right, fine, like I have to save William now. That's more what I need to do. So Robert is then holding a piece of cloth that's left behind by William. Is it like left behind? Is it just something that like got ripped off of him? Like,
Um, I don't specifically remember the significance of it, but I think it's definitely some sort of symbolism that means Scotland. Um, just the bloodied nature of Scotland, how battered and bruised it is. But yeah, I don't remember specifically the cloth, but that is something like that. It's that cloth is meant to represent something about Wallace or Scotland.
fair enough. So yeah, on the banks of a river, we're with the remnants of Wallace's friends and troops and everyone. And Hamish is trying to get his father to drink some water, and the father's obviously very beat up, and he tells his son that, I'm dying, let me be. And Hamish says, no, you're going to live. And then Hamish's father's just like, look, I've lived long enough to live free, proud to see the man that you are, and I'm a happy man. And then he fades off into the light. Hamish is obviously upset, his father just passed, and Stephen and Will look on somberly, and they're not exactly happy about what has happened either.
Massive L.
Yeah, it sucks. It's not good. So back at the battlefield, there are some women and Robert and some children. They're all walking around. They're looking at the carnage, looking for their husbands. It's heartbreaking. It's a heartbreaking scene. Robert's overcome with devastation and he falls to his knees. And, he's just overcome with grief and guilt. Now, was it common for women to then like go to the battlefields afterwards to try to find their husbands?
No. Well, yes and no. Um, some women will have travelled with their husbands. A lot of the role of women in medieval warfare was more assistance more than anything else. Some wives and children would have come with them because they just have nowhere else to go. Um, but they would have stayed a little bit back. But they would have done stuff like meal prep, looking after the camp, that sort of thing. I think as well, though, there is a bit of dramatization in that.
Okay, fair
Yeah,
enough. Yeah,
but
yeah.
it wasn't uncommon for women to travel with medieval armies.
Sure. So Robert the Bruce is back with his father, who I'm just calling old man because otherwise it's going to become too confusing on who Robert is and who Robert is, and because they're both named Robert. So the old man says he's the one that's rotting, but Robert's face looks graver than his, and he pretty much says that, son, we must have an alliance with England to prevail here. We achieved that. You saved your family and increased your land. In time, you will have all the power in Scotland. And Robert retorts, saying, lands, titles, power, men, I have nothing. Men fight for me because if they do not, I starve them and throw out, and I starve their wives and children. Those men who bled on the ground in Falkirk, and he fights for something that I've never had. And I took it from him when I betrayed him, and I saw his face on the battlefield. It's tearing me apart. Truly heartbreaking scene, beautifully delivered by the actor. I think many of the actors were very good. I mean, sure, say what you want about the accents, but like their performances,
And
very
that
strong.
and that's why I can look past the accents. It is legitimately as a story, it's so well told.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I mean, I can't say that about many films, but um, if the accents were fixed, like honestly, it would have been such a good film, an even better film than it already is.
Right, it's already considered one of the best films of all time.
Right. Hmm.
Um, And I know a lot of people have this film in their top 10 of all time films.
I would probably agree with that.
Yeah,
It's probably one of my top 10 as well.
yeah, it's somewhere in the top 10, maybe like somewhere on the board it's made it. But yeah, then the old man comes back with all men betray, all lose heart. And Robert, who's completely broken at this point, is just like, I don't want to lose heart. I want to believe as he does. And I was like, okay, so is like the last bit of the film gonna actually follow Robert and like, winning for Scotland and, claiming the crown? I feel like they have to show a little bit of that. I don't know how much of it they're going to show, but like they have to show a little bit of it because I do know that like that's kind of how history goes. But I don't know what we'll see, but I feel like we're going to see something there. And Robert ends this scene by saying, I will never be on the wrong side again. And I was like, well, you will. At least now you're done listening to your father, who seems to be the one that's keeping you, at least in terms of the film. I don't know about historically, but like in terms of the film, your father seems to be the one that's like still pulling all the strings, even if you don't feel like that's the right thing to do.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I've never met Robert the Bruce. I was kind of born at the wrong time. Um, but the whole idea that Robert the Bruce is being torn between English bribes and his Scottish conscience, um, I I get the feeling he was always pro Scotland. He's always been pro Scotland. Um, but I just think it just makes for a good story to have him torn between England and so the English king and the land.
It does make for good storytelling. It's
Oh,
very effective.
yeah.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think if if you take away the whole historical accuracy of it and just look at it as a story, I think like it stands pretty well as a not as a piece of history, but just just as a good story, as I keep saying.
Yeah, I think Ross said it beautifully a couple episodes ago, where it's like, hey, understand that it's loosely based on history.
Yeah,
Like, it's taken historical events, but then told it in a more interesting way.
yeah,
Because it
100%.
might not necessarily be the most interesting if you just follow historical events accurately. So, like, yeah, it might not be completely accurate, but that's okay. That's not the point of the film. The film isn't trying to be a documentary, it's trying to display the story in a way that will connect with people.
England is presented as the bad guy, and for good reason. They were the bad guy. But there is a specific reason that they don't show us what happens after they break through the gates at the sacking of York. Do you know why that is?
Because they behead everybody?
Uh, Everything that William Wallace gets angered by when the English like wreck his village and all that. That's literally what they did at York as well. Like they beheaded, they had their way with the woman, they stole, they burned it down to the ground. I mean, sacking. I mean, like medieval warfare was pretty brutal. Um, but there's a specific reason they didn't show what happened after breaking through the gates because that would have presented them as very bad, and that doesn't make for a great story. Um,
Yeah.
in fact, if anything, would just make us go, well, we don't give a what happens to them after this.
Right. Good storytelling. But yeah, I mean, like, that's just how warfare was back then. And it's not, saying that like any side was good or bad. There were atrocities on both sides. It depends on, which side of the story you're looking at, right? Which point of view are you telling the story from? This one is obviously from the Scottish point of view. And so it's like, all right, we need to make England the bad guys. Now, if we were telling the exact same story, but from Longshank's point of view, Scotland would be the bad guys and William Wallace would be the bad guys. So like it just depends on which point of view we're looking at.
There are still aspects of Scottish people, some sects of Scottish people today that still regard William Wallace as a terrorist. Um, and that's because they're fiercely loyal to England and the English crown, if you want to refer to them as that. Um, but Uh, History is always about perspective, you know. History is written by the winners. But I think most people can identify an oppressed nation when they read about one. Um, oh, yeah. But it's generally regarded as William Wallace being on the right side of history. Generally regarded as that, as is most oppressed peoples.
Right. Yeah. Fair enough. Well, before we continue, we're going to take a quick intermission, and then we will be back with more of Braveheart. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for listening to this episode of Post Finale. I hope you are all enjoying this episode, and if you want to gain access to more bonus content, like access to my notes and access to some of the tier lists that I make, and help suggest films and things like that, all of that can be done over at our Patreon, and that can be found at patreon.com/coopforge. So that's patreon.com/co_OPFORGE. Signing up for any of the tiers gets you different types of bonus content depending on the tier that you sign up for, and a shout out here on the show for every patron that signs up. It really means the world to us, and it helps us grow this show and helps us be able to put the money back into this show to make it a better experience for you, the listeners. That is our entire goal here at Co-op Forge. So thank you all so much if you are considering doing this. Now, if you want to help the show in a non-monetary way, that is fantastic as well. You can do so by just talking about us and sharing it with a friend. Just reach out to a friend and be like, hey, you love movies, or hey, you need an excuse to watch more movies. Check out this show called Post Finale. The host is silly, he's an actor, he's confused most of the time, gets a lot of guesses wrong, but overall it's a lovely time and some interesting discussions about some iconic films. I think you'll really enjoy it. It really does help. And be sure to talk about us on social media and follow us on social media. That really helps out a lot as well. If you're looking for the show, you can find us on Instagram and Facebook at Post Finale Pod. And then you can also find us at Co-op Forge on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And that's at Co-op Forge, at CO_OPFORGE. And we post content not just from Post Finale, but from the other shows here on Co-op Forge as well. So that includes Flip the Scripts, and that includes Seattle Across the Pond. So be sure to follow both of those channels. Again, it's at Post Finale Pod and at Co-op Forge, CO_OPFORGE. But just thank you so much for listening to this episode. Wherever you are, if you're enjoying the episode, if you're listening on YouTube, please please hit subscribe. It really does help us out. If you're listening on a podcast app, that's great as well. It doesn't matter to us where you're listening. We're just so thankful that you're listening. But if you're listening on a podcast app, please leave a rating. It really does help us out. Please leave a review and hit that follow button. You can also turn on notifications both on YouTube and on the podcast apps just to be notified when new episodes come out. It really does mean a lot that you are all listening to these episodes, and thank you all so much. So let's get back to the episode without further ado. So, meanwhile, Murnay is having a dream where he sees William riding towards him on a horse with flames behind him. It's a beautiful shot. Fantastic shot right there. It was just like the silhouette of Wallace with like a wall of flames. It was beautiful. And he wakes up, he's shivering, and is calm for a second, and then Wallace breaks down the door of his room with a horse. And I'm like, I'm not like impressed that Wallace has shown up on a horse to kill Mornay or anything. Like, yeah, sure. Like, Mornay betrayed him. Fine. Like, whatever. Wallace is going to do what Wallace is going to do. I'm more impressed that he managed to get the horse into the sleeping quarters, which must have been like a pretty tight fit. Because I'm assuming small pathways.
I was very confused when I watched this again. I did wonder to myself, how does he manage to fit an entire horse in there? But what I want to chat about that particular scene, get to the end of that scene.
Okay. So he, gets the horse to climb up on top of Mornay and then bludgeons him with the ball and chain. And I was like, well, goodbye, Mornay. You should have known this is coming. You turned your back after giving your word. And then, you also turned your back on your country. Like, that sucks. But also, you should have known that William wasn't just going to let it slide. Yeah, like, you should have known this. So, William hears that people are coming in to, like, chase him down and, like, stop him. And then he rides over to the window and it's a big drop into the water. So instead he turns back, attacks some of the attackers who have come to capture William. And then he and the horse just take like a swan dive out of the window and land in the water below. And then end of scene.
It's like, I keep saying it, he's just so wasteful with these horses.
Does the horse make it?
Well, I mean, like, by all accounts, no. If the horse landed with its legs down, there's absolutely no chance that horse. I mean, like, a horse with broken legs is as good as dead, right?
Yeah.
Horses can swim. They're not the best swimmers, but they can swim. Thank you. And horses with broken legs in water, they're drowning. What William Wallace should have done, should have left his left his horse at the door, gone and killed Lachlan, gone back out again, and just rode away. That's what he should have done. But no, he had to make a big thing about.
He had to make it dramatic.
Way too dramatic.
It doesn't make any sense. Also, how did he get the horse into the room, first of all?
You look at that scene a little bit more closely, and the house looks like a set. The house looks like a set. It doesn't look like a house. It looks like a stage. The floor is too pristine on that. Watch it again, and like there's just something about it. It's just like it's too wide. Like it's way too wide. I mean, by no means am I an expert in medieval architecture, but you even go to like some palaces or like some church halls, and they're not even that wide.
No, and I mean, like, what? You and I have gone to many churches, cathedrals, probably old castles and stuff, just, from living in the UK. They're kind of everywhere. And, like, even those, they're not, like, massive. They're actually quite small. Like, even, like, some of these, like, super famous cathedrals are relatively small.
I've been to numerous Scottish castles in my life before. They're cramped. They're really cramped in there. There is no chance that you'd fit a good chunk of people in there. Yeah, a horse, you wouldn't be able to do it.
Exactly. Like, I've also been to a decent few number, probably less than you, but like I've also been to like some Scottish castles, and it's just like it doesn't make sense. Anyway, he's wasteful with his horses. That's what we've put together. He just doesn't care about
It's Grand Theft Auto with horses, basically.
them. Pretty much. That's all it is.
Was that even his horse that he took?
Let's be honest, no. Because he doesn't have a horse. He doesn't have an emotional connection with anyone other than maybe Hamish or Stephen, who are left.
Likely.
Yeah. Those are the only other two living creatures. I mean, they are humans, but I'm going to say creatures because I want to include horses into this. Those are probably the only two creatures that he has a connection with.
Mm-hmm.
So later at a feast, Robert the Bruce and some others are all sitting at a table, and we learned that what happened was true. William did ride into the bedchamber and killed Mornay. And Craig, who's the one telling this, is like, oh, nobody knows who'll be next. And Robert just goes, true, maybe you. And then Craig's just like, what the man? And then it's like, maybe me. And it's just like, it doesn't matter. And then Robert snaps, if like, to show that he's serious. And then from the rafters falls a dead Lachlan. Oh, look. Whoop-de-doo. Lachlan's dead too. We don't see that one, but like, why hoist him up into the rafters?
Dramatic effect.
William, you are one for the theatrics, and I appreciate this. Thank you. But at the same time, like, you're creating extra work for yourself, and you're being wasteful.
I mean, wasteful theatrics is just Hollywood, isn't it? Uh, I mean, like, I think William Wallace might have actually won independence, and uh, you know, without spoiling what happens at the end, um, I think he might have been a little bit more successful for himself personally if he just stopped with the overperformative revenge and just got on with what he was meant to be doing.
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking about it for the last 3 episodes, probably at this point, but it definitely feels like he has, at this point, completely forgotten to use his brain like Argyle taught him to,
Hmm.
as is alluded to at the beginning of the film. Like, he doesn't use his brain after Murren gets killed. He's just out for revenge and just wants as much English blood as possible. And it's not for any other reason. He just literally wants revenge, and it's not really getting him. Like, he's gotten people to rally, which is great. And like, I'll talk about this in a little bit, um as well, in like the next 2 minutes. Of, I do think he uses his brain a little bit.
There is
So
there's an ancient Welsh proverb which is to do with medieval warfare, and that's in a fight, anger is just as good as courage, which is what this is really tapping into. Um, the whole thing about Murren getting killed, spurring on William Wallace, whether or not that's true, I don't know. Very unlikely to be true. Uh, but it is it's a good motive for him to do what he does, and I think it would be a good motive for anyone to do the exact same. Um, but I think what that was doing, it was just encouraging. No, it was just a good capture of what a lot of people must have been feeling at that time anyway. Um, yeah, I think the idea that he is so angry that he becomes good at what he does, I think, is pretty realistic actually.
yeah, no, it makes sense, but it just feels like somewhere along the line he has forgotten to also start applying his brain again. Like, he's gotten very good at what he's doing, but I just feel like he's forgotten to, like, implement, like, great, I've gotten really good at the whole fighting and rampaging and pillaging and wreaking havoc on the English. Fantastic. But you have forgotten to then slowly add back in the element of, like, oh yes, I have to think about this tactically if I want to gain independence and freedom.
Well, the thing you have to remember about William Wallace, he wasn't a politician. He was a farmer. He was literally a farmer that hated English people. He wasn't a politician. He wasn't a noble. I mean, he becomes a noble, but like certainly in this telling of the story, he's a noble, but he's still very much a noble that wears the tatty tartan that uh, that he's wearing at the start of the film. I don't think he ever changes his clothes actually, as they did back in medieval times. Really, he
If he does, it is so minimal you can't really tell. Like, maybe it's like he has a different armored something as he's going into battle. Like, that might be the most of it. Is like they have a little bit of more leather or something to, like, protect themselves. Like, that's it.
he doesn't wear any armor at all in the film, if I remember correctly.
I think
Um,
he only has like leather
I
straps a
don't.
bit
I don't
more.
think I don't think he even wears leather. I think he's literally.
Really?
Yeah, I
Huh.
think he might. I think he might wear leather boots. But like, if you watch a little bit more closely, I think it is literally just his tunic that he's wearing.
That's very
But
possible.
but it's done sort of stylistically that it looks like armor. Um, which is what I was going back to earlier. Everyone is wearing the exact same thing. They're just wearing like farmers' clothes essentially. Uh, and if you get like 100 farmers charging across a field with their farming tools, maybe some axes and a sword here and there, against heavily armored English guys, of course you're going to lose. Which is why I don't know how they even won the Battle of Stirling Bridge
No,
in
no,
the film.
no. They don't question it. I've learned a long time ago. The more I question Hollywood, the more my brain hurts. So, like, I still question it, but at a certain point, I just stop.
Yeah. What was the point you were making again?
I don't know.
No, neither do I. Okay. Anyway, on
Okay,
you go.
so William is off on a journey. Meanwhile, the rumors start to grow, and William was it's like, well, William Wallace killed 50 men, 50 if it was one, 100 men with his own sword, cut through them like Moses through the Red Sea. Now, I have an issue with this. Moses parted the Red Sea. He did not cut the Red Sea. There is a difference.
Uh, I think education wasn't the best out in the 1200s.
Sure, fine. I will cut them slack for the 1200s, but it's something that people say now.
Maybe things were different back then. Who knows?
So William and his men have done a lot in the recent months, and this is where I was saying maybe he's used a little bit of that brain, because like he took revenge on Monray and he took revenge on Lachlan, but he hasn't taken revenge on Robert the Bruce. And I know technically, historically, why he can't take revenge on Robert the Bruce in the film, because otherwise it doesn't work at all. But like, I think in terms of like the way that the film works, I think like a reasoning might potentially be that like, okay, he knows that what Robert did is terrible, but he also knows that like if Scotland is to gain freedom, then Robert is the man that has to lead them. Like nobody else can take the crown. It has to be Robert. And so maybe that's why he just like gives Robert kind of a pass.
Um, yeah, I probably agree with that. Yeah.
Cool. So the king's advisors say that the legend of William is growing and it'll be worse than before. And, he rallies new volunteers at every Scottish town. And then when he replenishes his numbers, the king interrupts them and is like, sheep, mere sheep. And I'm like, well, these sheep are becoming quite a nuisance for you, aren't they, Mr. King? And then he was like easily dispersed. Then he's like, easily dispersed if we kill the shepherd. And I was like, oh, he was calling the men the sheep. Okay, that makes more sense. I thought he was also calling Wallace a sheep. And I was like, I'm confused. So the king is pretty much like, great, pick a flock of your finest assassins, set a meeting. We are going to send an ambush. And the advisors are like, Wallace can smell an ambush from miles away. And the king's like, look, if my intel is correct, then he warmed up to our future queen and would trust her. And he's like, come on, like, don't tell the princess. And so I'm like, great. I didn't think that the princess was going to be involved in his death. And I was like, okay, but then again, the king probably wouldn't tell her that he's also sending assassins. So like, let's be honest, like she's probably going to just not know if she is involved in his death. But also I'm pretty sure that he gets captured. So I don't think the assassin plot is going to work. So the prince is also in the room, and I'm just surprised that the prince is around. He's kind of useless.
I don't like his character.
I think I said it in the last episode. Man crumples faster than a 6-year-old sparring in Taekwondo.
The prince doesn't add anything to the story. Like it does nothing for the story.
No. He's
So
just there because he needs to be.
Right.
I think the one thing that it does do for the story is sets up the end.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll discuss that next week. But like I think that's the one reason why it's important to have the prince in the story, because it sets up what happens at the end. So, but yeah, the king tells them to pretty much dispatch the princess under a notion of peace, and the advisor says that the princess might be taken hostage and her life may be put in jeopardy. And the king is just like, well, the prince would be most distressed by this. And it's like, in truth, if she were to be killed, we would soon find the King of France an useful ally against the Scots. And meanwhile, we pan away and we see that the maid is listening to all of this outside. So I was like, aha, this is how the princess is going to help William. Because, she loves him. And the king looks at his son and just goes, as king, you must find good in any situation. Cool. Fair enough. It's a fantastic scene. Again, the actor who plays the king nailed it.
Beautifully hittable.
Beautiful job. he played the villain very well. It's very fun playing villains.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's there's something quite Alan Rickman about him. I don't know how to describe it, but just the quality of his voice, and just uh, his subtle hate expressions, because he doesn't show anything on his face, but you
Yeah.
can still see it.
It's all in the eyes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So, meanwhile, Hamish, Stephen, and Will are all there for a meeting, and we see a knight that confirms that William has given up his sword. William and Hamish walk up and then push two English guards into the hut. Stephen and William bring forward a cart of wood, and then they start pouring more of this tar on top of the hut, and then William sets fire to the hut, burning the knights inside alive. Um, why was this scene needed?
I'm not sure. Um,
Cool.
I I mean, Ilona, my girlfriend Ilona, yesterday was saying this film is half an hour too long, and I think they could have done without that particular scene and maybe a few more trims here and there.
Yeah, like I just because I thought that this was going to be the meeting with the princess, and then when it turned out that it wasn't, I was like, why did we need this? What was the
Yeah,
point?
I don't think it adds anything, but I mean, like it's very clear that he was like that was the assassins, like the people that were going to kill him. Like he was just going to get killed there, and the whole Wallace can smell an ambush from a mile off. That's him just proving that. But again, I don't think the scene adds anything.
Yeah, okay, cool. It didn't feel like it did. So now we see the princess, and I was like, we're now at the secret meeting, and she seems alone in the hut. And then, oh look, William has snuck his way in. Oh, lovely. And he received her message, and I'm just like, oh, it's a trap. It's a trap. I don't like this. And William says it's the second time she has warned him of danger, and he asks why. And I was like, oh, okay, it's no longer a trap. But the why, it's because she loves you. Open your eyes, you fool. I say this from afar. I'm terrible at recognizing any sort of anything. um, so the princess says there will be a new shipment of supplies coming north next month, food, weapons, etc., etc. William just stops her and asks, "Why are you helping me?" And she just looks at him and is like, "Because of the way that you were looking at me now." And I was like, "I told you, I knew it." And William and the princess have a quick kiss and then an embrace. And then, oh, look, they're spending the night together. Lovely. They don't spend much time on it. Pretty much they lay down and then we cut to the next morning. And we depart. The two lovers depart with a deep, passionate kiss as well. And I was like, okay, I guess this isn't the trap, but there has to be a trap that he doesn't see coming. Otherwise, how are you going to catch William Wallace? Like, it doesn't make sense. There needs to be some sort of trap somewhere. So, meanwhile, the old man and the king, they're both very ill. And we see that, the princess is just on cloud nine, loving everything because she got boinked by William Wallace.
I mean, who wouldn't be pleased with that?
I can think of a few people who might not be pleased of it.
This is my biggest problem with this film. This is a movie produced and directed by Mel Gibson, starring Mel Gibson, and he's cast himself in a role where he's getting off with a female actress who is also naked and probably no more than 25, if not probably slightly younger.
I think they were in their both of the actresses were in their early 20s. Mel Gibson was 38 when this was filmed.
Does that not feel uncomfortable to you?
Yeah.
Hollywood is just messed up.
Hollywood is very messed up. Then again, we're both actors.
But I mean, I do make films myself. No more, not as much as I used to. But I mean, the fact that this whole entire film happened and produced, directed, starring him, and him getting off with a 20-year-old on camera, and probably not once did anyone go, "It's kind of dodgy," you know?
Yeah, I think They may have, but I also do know one thing, just because social media exists. But I do know that he didn't originally want to play William Wallace.
Hmm.
I did hear somewhere slash read somewhere at some point in my life. I don't know when, because I
Oh
don't
yes, no.
I don't look up anything specifically, but he didn't want to play the role. I don't remember the reasoning, but
Ilona said to me that um, he originally had planned for Brad Pitt to play it or something like that.
yeah, I don't know what it was, but like I do know that like he only planned on producing and directing the film. He didn't plan on also starring in it. But then I think like the big company or some other producers, I don't know, somewhere the funding wasn't coming in unless Mel Gibson signed on to play William Wallace. And like that was the only way that they were going to give him like I guess the rest of the money that he needed, or like sign on and support, or like whatever. I don't know all the politics behind that. Ladies and gentlemen, if we find an article about it, we'll post it in the description. No guarantees. But
Re- well,
yeah.
regardless, whether or not he wanted to play the role, he did put himself in that position. Um, I mean, did he need to show them actually getting off with each other?
I mean, he didn't the second time. He kind of did the first time.
Hmm. Um, yeah.
Yeah.
I just think it's a bit odd.
It's definitely odd. It's in there. But it was also the 90s and Hollywood, and odd things continue to happen. We try to, make sure that they're less odd and less creepy and less disgusting. But that's all we can strive to do, is try to make everything a safe work environment. And hey, like if it was a very safe work environment and everyone was okay with it, no one, maybe they had these discussions behind closed doors. We don't know. No
I mean,
clue.
like, I never checked the credits to see if there was an intimacy director or anything like that.
Yeah, I didn't check. I would hope that there is. I know that
You'd hope
now it
so.
is required that you have one.
Hmm.
Even for, I think, like kissing scenes, it is required to have one.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, like it is required to have an intimacy director on set if there is any sort of intimacy whatsoever.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, yeah, yeah, yeah. Very important to have, and they play a very important role. So, anyway, we have one little scene that we'll talk about, and then we'll wrap up this episode. But Craig and someone else comes along with them, and they seek a meeting. And William's like, "What's the point? You've all sworn loyalty to Longshanks." And Craig's just like, "An oath to a liar is no oath at all." And I'm like, "Yes, it is, you filthy bastard. This is a setup. I have finally found the setup after being wrong like 4 times in a row." This has to be it, because at this point I'm just like, look, we only have like maybe 25 minutes of the film left. If this isn't the setup, I don't know how many more of these they can
Maybe,
have without it
maybe
not
he
being a
survives.
setup.
Maybe he survives.
I'm pretty sure he doesn't. I know some of history. Not a lot, but like I do know a little bit.
I'll give you a clue. He's not alive today.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, I was upset with Ross though, because Ross was there physically, so I was like, dude, what the hell? Why don't you have better information for me? But your ancestors were still in Indonesia at the time, so I'll cut you some slack. So yeah. Anyway, William is just like, okay, like tell the council to swear publicly, in then we'll call it good. And Craig's like, look, they cannot, some scarcely believe that you're alive, and others think that you'll pay them Munray's wages. Why do people not believe that he's alive? Did I miss something?
Uh, I don't know.
Okay, sure.
I don't know.
Maybe just through the rumors and the legends, some of them are you're dead.
Yeah.
Who knows? We'll chalk it up to that. So pretty much, Craig bids him to Edinburgh, and meet 2 days from now. Pledges your pardon, and we'll unite behind you. And I was like, no, you won't, you filthy bastard. And Craig says, no, he means this. and then pulls out the bloody rag, cloth, whatever you want to call it, that Robert the Bruce had at the end of the Battle of Falkirk. And, you know, he sees this, William sees this, he grabs it very quickly, almost like he didn't want anyone else to see it. With like the speed that he grabs it and kind of like tucks it away. But it's the pledge of Robert the Bruce. And this is where I was like, okay, now I don't know what to think. Because on one hand, I don't trust Craig, and I don't trust many of the other Scottish lords. But on the other hand, I trust Robert the Bruce because I also know historically Robert the Bruce is the first king of Scotland. Is he the first king, or is he just like the one that gains the independence?
The latter. The king before Robert was a chap called John Balliol, who was he tried his best to fight against the English, but lost outright. So he essentially surrendered, thus giving Edward Longshanks, King Edward, full reign of Scotland, which is the position that they find themselves at the start of the film.
Right, okay. Now, if Robert has a claim to the Scottish throne, why did his father not have a claim to the Scottish throne?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, if anyone knows, let us know in the comments. Because, like, why, if there was so much controversy, right, like, at that time, why didn't Robert's father, who was also Robert, why didn't he say, no, like, I'm going to be the new king of Scotland, and then, like, they wouldn't have found themselves in this situation? I'm not asking you to know the answer. This is just like questions that pop into my head, and sometimes
I don't quite know
universe.
I don't quite remember. Sorry, because I did study this once upon a time, but I don't quite remember. The whole lineage, who was king at what time. In my mind, John Balliol was still king, but he was essentially like a puppet king. Like he was essentially under Edward's control, which would make sense as to why Robert wasn't there at that point. Robert was somewhere along the line, like somewhere in line to the throne, but I don't know where his dad comes into it. Again, I don't remember. It's been a very long time since I looked at this.
That's fair enough. So this is where we're ending this week's episode, but I'm kind of in two minds of how I think this ambush is gonna work, right? Either one is that Robert doesn't know the ambush is going to happen, and Craig has made a backroom deal with the king to ambush William when he comes, and it's going to be a surprise for Robert. And Robert the Bruce legitimately thinks that William Wallace is coming there for talks and, to sign and, everything like that. Right? So that's option one. That's what I think is probably more likely because I don't trust Craig. The second thing is Robert the Bruce then is actually still kind of playing for, King Edward. But then that doesn't, the reason I'm less confident on that theory and more confident on the first one is that it doesn't make sense for what we've seen happen with his character so far, where he literally says, I don't want to be on the wrong side again. Like, I'm not okay with this anymore.
Yeah.
And also because I know historically, like, not film-wise, but historically, he does gain independence for Scotland. So then it doesn't make sense that if he turned in William Wallace, then why would the Scots who seemingly loved William, according to the film, they loved William, and why would they then follow this new guy who just turned in one of the greatest military leaders of their time?
Well, as Ross said, Robert the Bruce and William Wallace very likely never met each other.
Right.
So, even if he did betray William Wallace,
we would know.
Yeah. Um, the, you're absolutely right. The film doesn't frame it as Robert getting ready to betray William Wallace.
Yeah, I would be, and I mean, I have been wrong multiple times before, but I would be very fascinated if Robert betrays William Wallace here. I think it's more Craig is going to betray William, and Robert's going to be caught off surprise. And then pretty much what I think is going to happen in the rest of the film is that, William's going to be captured, he's going to be tortured, and then, eventually, you know, uh, goodbye. And then I think the end of the film, like the last 10 minutes or so, might show, like, how Robert then takes over and wins independence. So I think that is kind of what's going to happen for the rest of the film. But be sure to join us next week, ladies and gentlemen. Brian, thank you so much for joining me this week. If people want to find you, check out things that you are doing, how can they do that? Where can they find you? Before you answer that, Pranav, cut this tiny bit part out. But this episode, I want to tell you when it's coming out so that if you have a show or anything happening at around that time, you can promote that as well.
Uh,
Um,
Nothing that I would probably share on here, to be honest.
oh, okay.
Yeah, no shows, but yeah, socials
Yeah,
and
yeah,
all
yeah. No, no, no. Fair enough. Cool. So, where can they find you?
You can find me at Brian Maitland on TikTok or Instagram. That's on the road to 60K at the moment on TikTok. So if you want to be part of the Scottish Army, my own Scottish Army, not William Wallace's army, follow at Brian Maitland. Let's go.
Yeah. Hey, I'm not even Scottish, but it's a fun follow. But ladies and gentlemen, we will link that down in the description so that it's easy for you all to find. Brian, thank you so much for joining. I look forward to discussing the end of this film with you and listeners. Thank you so much for listening. And until next week, we'll catch y'all later. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for listening to this episode of Post Finale. Post Finale is created, hosted, and produced by me, Ankit Madhira. Our editor is Pranav Nair. The music is by Ankit Madhira and Megan Hutcherson, and the art is by Jarid Rother. If you are all enjoying this episode and want to gain access to more bonus content, you can do so by heading over to patreon.com/coopforge and signing up for any of the tiers. You get loads of different bonus content, such as notes and commentary that we have as we're watching the films, as well as some bonus audio, some bonus videos, and ad-free episodes, early access if we get them done early, and different things like that. All of that can be found at patreon.com/coopforge, and that's patreon.com/co_opforge. If you want to help out the show in a non-monetary way, that's great as well. Tell a friend about the show. Just reach out and be like, hey, you love films, or hey, you need an excuse to watch some more films. Check out the show called Post Finale. The host is an actor, and he's funny and silly, confused most of the time, but they have interesting discussions about some popular films that I think you would really enjoy. It really does help us out a lot. Be sure to talk about us on social media at Post Finale Pod on Instagram and Facebook. And you can also follow us at Co-op that's CO_OPFORGE on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. And there we post content not just from Post Finale, but also from the other shows hosted here on Co-op Forge, which are Flip the Scripts and Seattle Across the Pond. So a lot of fun things can be found over there on our social media. It really, really does help us out a lot. Thank you to everyone who has already done this. Thank you to everyone who will do this in the future. It really does mean a lot to us, and it helps us create better content for you, the listeners, as we grow. It really does help, and thank you so much for listening to this episode of Post Finale, and I can't wait until next week. And until then, I'll catch y'all later.